Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have concerns or are seeking a diagnosis or treatment, please seek individual advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks associated with acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride.
Please drink responsibly and in moderation. Before drinking, please be sure to be of the legal drinking age for your country. We do not encourage the misuse of alcohol.
Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, psychologist.
And I'm Terr Prisco, physician assistant.
You're going to shake your cocktail for us?
I know. I was like, it will have real sound effects. Yeah, I actually brought it up. You get the pour going on. It's a little ASMR for people.
Nice. I like it.
So when people see this video, they'll realize that we're twinning and it's not intentional. We have like a high neck black shirt with like cap sleeves, sort of short sleeves going on.
Because it's a bajillion degrees today in New Jersey. So.
Right. Yeah. Mine's like a little dress thing that's like a comfy, like just throw on type thing.
Mine's just like a top. It had like wide leg, like crop pants, but I worked from home today. So I just threw on the top with my at-home sweatpants.
That's always nice. That's like all like the COVID times where everybody had like what they wore down below the waist.
Yes. Professional from the waist up.
Exactly. It's like the new party in the, was it? Business in the front, party in the back.
Yes, exactly. It's the new mullet, the new clothing mullet.
Clothing mullet.
Yes.
Anything else spectacular? Oh, how was your baseball game?
Oh, that was 2 weeks ago.
Was it? I feel like that was like yesterday. Maybe it's because they edited an episode.
Maybe. Yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. It was with work. It was nice. I didn't stay for the whole game, but I did stay longer than I originally intended because we're just socializing. And I was actually talking with someone at my job who would like to start doing a professional podcast for our practice. So I was telling them like about our growth and how we've been doing so far.
Yeah, our little journey and figuring our stuff out.
Yeah. So it was cool.
Give advice to the newbies.
Yes, exactly. So might be doing a second podcast or potentially a third because I was talking with my other friend about doing like just like a silly ridiculousness podcast, but I don't know if that's actually going to happen.
Oh, well, now you know you got all the experience, so try it out. You never know.
I don't know where I'm going to get the time to do 3 podcasts.
Yeah.
I do still have a full-time job, so.
Well, if it's a work one, then they can like pay you for that time, right? Or make it included in your hours somehow.
We'll see. So what else is going on? Anything fun to chat about, or should we just jump right in?
Trying to remember. Child's number 2 did make dance team again. So nice. Yay for her, but boo for she has an event for your birthday trip. So
sad.
Sorry.
Sad. You can't bribe Anthony into taking her on that.
It's like their like preview where we all get to see the dances for the first time before the season like kicks off for competition. So it's like a thing.
I see.
And I have to, do mom duties, but we'll find some other fun stuff to do. And we have to plan because your birthday also, both of our birthdays fall on a Monday when episodes release.
Yeah. So I got to think of something fun for my birthday. I'll do my birthday because I saw you wrote in the shared document like question mark. I was like, I could do that.
So we had to come up with something fun for yours.
Yeah, I'll think of something good. So should we get into it for today? My story's a bit long. It's a bit detailed. So.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. So I don't know anything about this, but the name.
Perfect.
Yeah, the name was intriguing. And I know that you put a couple sources like a book and documentary and whatever. So I'm waiting to hear the story.
Awesome. So this will be good because I have a lot of details because it's a very complicated story and I tried to like solidify it down. I'm good at like cutting down, but I also felt like there were so many like interesting little tidbits that I wanted to make sure I got them all.
All right.
Oh, the name of my drink, I'll start with that.
Yes.
It is called the Chowchilla cocktail. And it is an alliteration on the name Chowchilla, which is the town where this event occurred, which I'll be talking about in a minute. And fun fact, this cocktail comes from a book called Mixology and Murder, where the authors pair cocktails specifically to different crime stories. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, I already had that book in my Amazon list. And then when I was like looking for something to go with this story, it popped up. I was like, okay, now I got to buy this book.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to find some other related things, even though we're not true crime. I'm sure there's a lot of other crossovers.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. So this is pretty much like a glorified pina colada. It's very tasty. So you're going to take a half a cup of ice cubes, 2 ounces of vodka, 2 ounces of pineapple juice, 1 ounce of cream of coconut, and a half cup of fresh pineapple cubed. What you do is you throw all of that in the blender, blend on high for a few seconds, pour it into a highball glass with additional ice, and then garnish with a pineapple wedge. So that was what I did. And so the film, I watched many films on this, and I also read the book that I'm going to reference in grad school. But for now, I'm talking about the documentary Chowchilla on HBO Max. And this is a relatively new telling of this story because this happened originally in 1976. Oh. And this documentary came out in 2023.
Okay.
So it's definitely an update. And it was very intentional in doing it that way because it's following the survivors of the situation now, you know, almost 40 years later and seeing how they're doing. So I will start from the beginning. So in Chowchilla, California, which is in Central California, it is at that time in 1976, it was predominantly a farming and cattle ranching town. And it was a kind of just small town vibes, very quiet. Everybody kind of knew each other. They only had one major school in that area. So it covered all ages from like pre-K through high school. And so on July 15th in 1976, three armed men with pantyhose over their faces hijacked a school bus that contained 26 children and one male bus driver.
Wow.
They had shotguns and they were very demanding. And I'm going to go into detail about all of the things that happened and who was involved. But that's kind of like the big overall arching story about Chowchilla is it was a school bus kidnapping. And so I do believe, I didn't look into this and I should have, but I feel like it's probably one of the few like mass kidnappings. Usually if people are kidnapping, they're taking one or maybe two people or a family. Right. They're not going to take a bus full of 26 children.
So is it considered a hijacking if they're taking a vehicle?
So they take the bus, but then they abandon the bus and they kidnap all of the people inside. So kind of both.
Okay. Yeah, a little both. Okay.
Yeah. So for context, in July 15th, it was not school. It was a summer school program. They keep talking about it as summer school in this documentary, but then the way that they describe it, it sounds like more like summer camp. There were arts and crafts and swimming and like fun events. Right. So I don't think it was like truly school. I think it was more of like a recreational thing for the summer, which honestly is a little bit of a blessing because had this been doing during the school year, there may have been even more children on the bus or more children involved. Although 26 is a lot of kids.
A lot of kids.
Yeah. That's a full-on classroom of children. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit too big for a classroom, but that's a different story for another day. So the children on the bus, they were attending that summer camp program at the Dairyland School, which Dairyland School, isn't that like the
Sounds
sweetest
adorable.
Name? Yeah. And like they show pictures of it and it looks like one of those little old fashioned red schoolhouses. It's like the sweetest place ever. So on the bus was the bus driver, Ed Ray, who was only a part-time bus driver. He actually was a local farmer who just volunteered his time. He knew a lot of the people in town, knew a lot of the kids at school. And he's described in a couple other movies and in this, it's just a very sweet, kind of down-to-earth guy who he was just doing this for fun, just to help out. So he wasn't like a professional bus driver or anything like that. So that is the only adult involved. And then in the documentary, they only follow about 5 of the kids. I think it's probably a combination of, at this point, many of them have passed away. And then a lot of them just never wanted to be involved in discussing their story. So in any of the movies or documentaries you see, it tends to follow the same group of about 5 or 6 people.
Okay.
So in this documentary, we first meet Mike Marshall, who at the time of the kidnapping, he was 14. So he was the oldest child on the bus. And his story is really kind of sad because he normally didn't take the bus home.
Of course.
But the day before, he got in trouble for getting into some of his mom's beer and burning some popcorn and almost causing a fire. So as punishment, he had to take the bus home the next day instead of his mom picking him up. And then, not only that, he almost missed the bus. So he almost did not get on this bus. And he was the last child to board the bus.
Wow.
So it feels like, and we'll find out later that this actually ends up being a blessing for the other children. But for Mike himself, like he had so many opportunities to not be involved in this. And he was just there. And he kind of he talks about that in the documentary about, maybe I was supposed to be there. And some of the other kids on the bus are like, no, like an angel sent Mike on the bus to help us.
Oh, yeah. Like
so it's very sweet.
Something like that. Yeah.
And one thing they do talk about, and they show a lot of pictures of like the kids, what they look like then and then what they look like now. Mike was a hottie. He was like very like dark hair, like bad boy looking, like chiseled cheekbones.
He was 14 in 1976. He's up there now.
I mean, we were born in 1979, so we're not that off in age. But I mean, and he does not look the same now. But he's a good looking young man. Sounds like he was a bit of trouble. His mom is also in the documentary, which is very sweet. And she doesn't really talk about what spurned him to be on the bus, but you can tell that she's holding on to like a lot of regret and a lot of, upset about what he went through because he was on the bus that day, which, I'm sure all the parents feel that way too. Not that it was any of the parents' fault. So we follow Mike as the oldest on the bus, and the youngest children on the bus were only 4 years old. So that's a big gap, a big range of ages for those kiddos. Yeah, babies, literal babies. Yeah. At one point, Mike is talking about something that occurs later on, and he's essentially left like holding this 4-year-old girl. And it's like he has to make this decision, like, do I go or does she go? And he's like, I couldn't hand her over, so I went. And he's like, but then I had to leave her behind. So it wasn't like really good one way or the other. Spoiler alert, everyone survives.
All right. Yay. Happy endings.
But we'll go into the details. Well, happy is a usually used word. Although it does say it on the recipe for the cocktail. It's like, a tragedy with a happy ending. And I'm like, did you watch to the end? Because it's not really a happy ending. Like, did anyone die? No. But not a happy ending.
Okay.
So that's Mike. He's kind of the star of the show, and we'll find out why. Then someone else who's in the documentary, her name is Jennifer Brown Hyde, and she was 9 years old at the time of the bus kidnapping. And her brother, Jeff, who was 11 at the time, was also on the bus with her. So because this was summer camp and it was a small town, there was a lot of kids on the bus who were related, a lot who had siblings. So in a way, it's almost like a blessing because they're with each other to look out for each other. But then, like, imagine the parents freaking out that, like, both of their kids or multiple of their children.
Right.
Yeah. Then another person on the bus is Larry Park. He was 9 years old, and he basically says he was all over the effing place. He was jumping from seat to seat, and it sounds like maybe he was diagnosed with ADHD because he explicitly said that he didn't take his meds that day and he was really hyper. And so he was giving the bus driver a little bit of trouble, but in a fun way. Like the bus driver knew him, they were joking around.
Right.
And Larry was on the bus with his sister Andrea, who was 8 at the time. And in some of there's some dramatizations of it. A lot of the dramatizations focus on those two siblings because they were so close in age and they really did help each other get through this. Right. But it does show in the beginning, this original sibling rivalry where it was they're that close in age. One's a girl, one's a boy. Ew, I hate you. Stop annoying me. Mom, he's yelling at me. Mom, she's poking me. So it seems like they kind of had that typical relationship, but then grew closer after this.
Of course.
Another girl who's on the bus is Linda Carrie Jo LaBandiera, and she was 10. And on the bus was herself, 3 of her older sisters, and 2 of her cousins. So that was a whole family that was seriously impacted. 6 of their children were missing on this one time. And she was the 3rd youngest of 10 children in her family. So right there, 4 kids of their 10 are missing in one incident. It's got to be so heart-wrenching for children. And then someone who's talked a lot about in the documentary, but she actually is not in the documentary because she has since passed on, but is Jody Heffington, and she was 10 years old at the time. And they talk a lot about how she was just so good with the littler kids, and she was kind of like a mother figure and keeping them calm, but also helping some of the older kids and helping in the escape. And her son is actually in the documentary, and he talks about how the trauma from this incident essentially caused her alcoholism, which is what led to her death. And so he's kind of advocating for his mother on her behalf because she's no longer there.
Right. The PTSD, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really what this story is about. I'm going to go into the details of what happened and why, but the reason I'm talking about this story is because we learned so much about childhood trauma and what occurs immediately after, and then in the long run, and also how to address trauma in children. Like, think about currently, and then you talk about this in the documentary, currently, if there's a school shooting, there are counselors on site immediately. You know, they're reaching out to families or getting support for people. These children who are being separated from their parents at the border, we're aware that they need counseling and the families need support. All of that happened because of Chowchilla. Like, we learned from that these poor children, these 26 children who went through so much, we've learned how to do better for kids when bad things happen.
Yeah.
So what happened? Like I said, July 15th, these three men pull over. So essentially it's a very rural town. So they're driving through essentially farmlands, and the bus driver goes to turn and the road is blocked by a white van. And there's three men standing outside. So the bus driver's kind of like, okay, like, do they need help? What do they want? And then the three men approach the school bus. Their faces are covered with pantyhose, which the children talk, well, they're now adults, but they talk a lot in detail about how scary that was to not be able to clearly see the kidnappers' features, their eyes, their mouth, how their noses were pressed in by the pantyhose because they were too tight.
Right.
Which I feel like we've all seen that image,
yes, but
not in that traumatic way. And it kind of changes your perspective on what kids see in these scary situations. They were like, oh, we didn't think they were human. They didn't have eyes, all of this stuff. So it's very scary. So essentially they board the bus, they make the bus driver go sit in the back. And one of these three men decides to drive the bus to another location. The other two men follow in a white van. They drive around for some time and then they pull over. They make half of the school bus, the left side of the school bus, get out and get into a white van. And the other half of the school bus get out and get onto a green van. And this is where a lot of the siblings get separated initially. And there's a lot of upset because they weren't sitting next to each other on the bus. You know, the older ones were sitting in the front or they were sitting with their friends. And so that's the first time you really see that sibling bonds really get tested. And Larry talks about how he felt like he was so lucky because his sister was sitting on the same side of the bus as him. And a lot of the other siblings weren't. And so how he just felt like it was fate. Like, she sat near me, so I got to keep an eye on her. She got to keep an eye on me. Meanwhile, Jennifer, whose brother Jeff was there, they had to be separated. And she distinctly remembers her brother having to leave the bus first and looking back at her, kind of like giving her this like telepathic signal, like, do what they say, don't argue, like, just go along with it. Everything will be okay. And she says how that really stuck with her, that like the first thing he thought of was not himself, but like to look back and check on her. And so it's very sweet. So they separate the kids. Now they're in two separate vans. They drive them. And so they're in the back of just typical, 1970s, white van, creepy man, the stereotype.
Yes.
But all of the inside of the vans are all covered with like wood paneling that used to be on the walls. So they can't see out. So they're pitch black in these vans. And if you think about it, these are just regular, typical vans. They're cramming 13 children into each of these vans. So it's a lot of kids, all ages, all different sizes, and they're driving them around for 6 hours.
Oh my God.
So kids are getting car sick. They're urinating on themselves. They're vomiting out of fear. So they're really doing whatever they can to keep their spirits up. And in the one van, Jennifer talks about how they all started singing, "If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands." And no one clapped their hands. And like that sticks with her. And I'm like, that's so sweet. Like, it's so sad.
Yeah.
But they were, trying to keep each other up. They prayed for each other. They prayed for safety. And then eventually after about 6 or 7 hours, so at this point, they got kidnapped in the afternoon on the school bus home. So by this point, it's dark now. And they're slowly getting unloaded from the van, essentially into like a tunnel underground.
Wow.
So they're like, we don't know where they are. And the minute they get off the van, one of the other men is standing there with a shotgun. So like, there's no even chance for escape. So they load them off of the van one by one. Inside, they write down their names, their ages, and they take all their personal belongings. So at one point, Linda says that she had like this tiny little purse because she was only like 10. So she had a little purse. And she was scared to give them her purse because it had her address book in it. And she didn't want them to know where she lived or where her family lived. But they did take her, all of her belongings. And, some of the other kids said they took some of their clothing. Like at one point, I think it was Jennifer, she had gone swimming that day. So she had a bathing suit on underneath her clothes and they made her take off her top. So then she's just in like her little like bikini top. And she said like it wasn't like a sexual nature. It just seemed like they didn't want her to like be able to use it for something. So they took her shirt,
Huh.
but she was still clothed. And so they essentially load all of these kids into this, what feels like a tent, which we later find out is a moving van buried underground.
Wow.
So now they've loaded all these kids into this area. There is some food and some water, mattresses. They made makeshift toilets for the children, and they put in ventilation fans. So this was planned out.
Very premeditated.
In fact, we find out later they had planned for 18 months. Down to identifying which town. They'd scattered out several towns and several schools. So they've got this whole plan. They put all the kids in there, and then they essentially kind of put like a manhole cover over how they had the kids go down into the van, and then they start to bury the van alive. So they hear dirt getting tossed over it. And of course, these kids are all freaking out.
Yeah.
So at this point, I want to kind of take a step back and say, well, what's going on? Like, if these were your kids, you're like, okay, well, they should be home by now. What the heck is going on?
Right.
So, of course, all the parents start calling the school, start calling the police, start showing up at the police station, and they all realize, like, this van is gone. Something happened. And because this was such a small town, they only had one patrol officer on duty at the start of that day.
Well, this is like old school, tiny town.
Yeah. But luckily, they knew like right away, okay, something's terribly wrong. So they called the state. They end up calling the FBI, I think like a couple hours later, once the state is like, no, this is bigger than we can handle. So they do get a lot of help in very quickly. And in addition to that help, they actually have two pilots who volunteer to do an air search in their own planes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so those pilots, Robert Gugel and Dan Lawrence, they take their own propeller planes out and are flying over the farmlands, and they actually locate the bus. But at this point, the bus is abandoned. So they're like, okay, the bus is there. It doesn't look like it's been in an accident, but everyone's gone. So now we need to start looking of where these kids could be.
And back then, obviously, there's no cameras. There's no anything.
It's 1976. No cell phones, no cameras, no traffic radar, things like that. So at this point, they're starting to come up with theories about who would do this. And for context, because this is a little bit before our time, this was around the time of the Patty Hearst kidnapping. And so their first thought was maybe this was politically motivated. Mm-hmm. But they also had theories that it was the Moonies. Do you know much about the Moonies?
Don't know.
They were a cult in California at the time. I could probably cover them on another episode because they're really interesting.
Doing a cult episode. You are doing a cult episode. I'm ready for it.
We'll do more than one cult episode. I don't care. And there's lots of movies about cults, so that works. They thought maybe it was a Zodiac killer or the son of Sam. So they had a lot of theories, but none of them really felt like it was fitting. But at least they were trying to think ahead and be like, okay, if it's political, what can we do? Or if it's, this cult, what do they want? So they're at least trying, right away, boots on the ground, figuring things out. So as I said, the kids were put underground, and they know that they're buried alive. After not too long, they start trying to plot an escape because they're like, okay, well, we're going to die if we stay in here. So we got to figure out how to get out. And so this is kind of heartbreaking. The kids kind of beg the bus driver to help them, but he is so traumatized and so terrified that he's afraid to dig out. He's like, what if they're out there with guns? They're just going to shoot us. Like, we can't do that. And that's when our hero, Mike Marshall, steps up, and he's like, if we're going to die, I'm going to die trying to get out. Like, let's just do this. And so Mike, along with Larry and the bus driver, eventually find a way to climb up to the top, move the manhole. But when they move the manhole, there's a box covering the manhole. So now they have to break their way out of that box and get through. All the while, now the roof is starting to cave in. And so there's dirt falling down on the children. They kind of have to hide on one side. They can tell this place is going to crumble. So we're either going to get buried alive, or we got to climb out. So it takes them quite some time. But they do eventually are able to break out of the box, and sunlight shines in because they've now been in this. They were buried underground. They were missing for 28 hours.
Okay.
And so they were buried underground for approximately 14 to 16 hours and spent the entire time through the night trying to get out. So they do get out, and one by one, they grab all the kids and bring them up to the surface, and they find that they're in a rock quarry and there's no one around. So... And I think it's Jennifer, one of the girls, says that like they got outside and it was fresh air and there were no kidnappers around, but they had no idea where they were and what to do. So they're all still so terrified that they were walking like single file behind the bus driver because they didn't like know what else to do. So they just like followed him. Like a little like row of ducks. Yeah. And then somebody who worked at the quarry was like, where do all these people come from? And then he recognizes, he sees all these kids and he's like, oh my God, this is the missing kids. So he calls the police. Police respond immediately. And this part kind of like kills my soul. They pick these kids up on a Greyhound bus.
Oh, geez.
They were just traumatized on a bus, and they pick them up on a bus. And then they take them to the local prison and give them prison uniforms and apples and milk and interview all of the children before bringing them back to their families.
Oh, Jesus. I mean, I don't need today's sensibilities to know that that's not a smart thing to do.
Well, and I think they were still trying to figure out, like, let's talk to these kids immediately, get everything that they know, and then, you know, we'll do the rest. I think they were like so focused on finding out who did it and capturing them that was their mentality. And they have video of these kids in the prison in like, you know, the little jumpsuits all like rolled up and eating snacks and like sitting with each other and like laughing. And like, you can tell they're traumatized, but they're also like looking at the ridiculousness of this. Like, these are little kids in a prison wearing like clothes that are too big.
I just assume you would be like, here's your parents. We're going to take you and we're going to go to the interview room. Here's your parent, like without them having time to like, I know their stories are going to get mixed up if they start talking. So like take each little group one at a time.
Yeah. Which, if we're like looking at the larger scope of things, when a crime like this happens and children are involved, you do want to talk with them as soon as possible before they start to lose those memories. But we've learned from other tragedies the proper way to interview children and the proper way to get that information, and making sure that their safety is obtained first and that they know that they're going to be safe is paramount. It does seem like, you know, the police officers and everyone involved were doing their best to comfort these kids. They were not going into this with harm in mind. It just, you know, they didn't have the forethought.
Nowadays, there's like a particular type of role, right? Like a forensic interviewer with
that's usually for child sexual trauma, but there's a specific role and a specific interview and a specific way of asking questions.
Okay.
But like a trauma like this, I'm not sure if they have the specifics for it. You know?
Okay.
So they interview the kids and all this stuff, and then immediately they're like, we got to find these guys. We know there's 3 guys. We don't really know what they look like, but we got to figure this stuff out. So they start doing their research. And they do eventually catch up with these kids. And they are kids. They are 20-year-olds. Like, they are young, stupid boys. So the ringleader of the whole thing was Fred Newhall Woods. And he is just fascinating because he came from one of the wealthiest families in California. And his goal in all of this was that he didn't want to rely on his family money. He wanted to make his own money, and he wanted to make it fast. But he was like repairing or restoring old cars and trying to sell them, and like little like businesses that really weren't taking off. And so he was like, he saw an article in the newspaper about how the state had a surplus from their budget. And he's like, well, that's how I'm going to get my money. And he's like, well, how am I going to get the state to give me money? And he determined if they stole a school bus and held the children for ransom, that the state would pay the money. So that way parents wouldn't have to pay the money. They didn't intend to hurt any of the children, but he would get this money essentially scot-free.
Yes, but I mean, his frontal cortex clearly is not formed correctly, because I don't know that state surplus just gets, handed out to kidnappers.
Right. And then in some of the dramatized versions, they kind of allude to him maybe using drugs or drinking or other things that are involved in that. Basically, they portray him as kind of like this poor little rich kid who doesn't want to work but doesn't want his parents' money and is kind of just reckless and all over the place. Mm-hmm. So he is the ringleader. This was his idea. And then he recruits his 2 friends, who are brothers, James and Richard Schoenfeld, who are also from an upper middle class family. Their father was like a very successful orthopedist. Like, they had good money. They had plans for themselves. One of them was going to go, I don't know why it's popping into my head. I could be wrong. He wanted to go to like Baylor or something. Like, he was planning to go to a good school and had a good future ahead of him. And in some of the dramatized versions, they kind of make it seem like these 2 brothers were bullied into it, that like Fred was their friend, but he also would like beat them up or like threaten them or things like that. And so they make it seem like they just went along with him. But I'm also like, you guys are like in your 20s, you got money, you have plans. Like, how much is it this is bullying or just stupid decision making? You know?
Whenever there's a group, it always puzzles me how you get somebody else to do the same crazy thing that you're thinking.
Well, that's a cult thing. That's the charismatic cult leader.
Yes. That's true. Charismatic leader. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I said, they had planned this for 18 months. So they're not even from the area. They're from somewhere else in California. And they start scoping out towns of where would be the easiest place. They actually go and kind of do like surveillance on the school for a couple of days before actually doing the school bus kidnapping. So they're planning all this out. These are not people who just made a stupid decision and were impulsive about it. There's a lot of forethought and planning. They later on, once they're captured, they find notebooks full of details and reasoning and plans. So it's like these people knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So eventually, what the plan was, what had happened was, their plan was bury the school bus, call the police, request a ransom. But at this point, they had driven around for so long that now they couldn't reach the police department because the parents were flooding the police phone lines. So they could never even demand their ransom. So Fred, the ringleader of it all, he decides he's going to escape to Canada. And he actually attempts to cross the border 3 times and is turned away each time without getting arrested. They catch him with a gun one time. They stop him for questioning another time. And each time they just turn him away. They're like, nope, you can't cross. And that's it. But he never gets arrested, even though this is literally international news at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, like they show in the Chowchilla documentary, they show that like newspapers in Spain and Japan and France were covering this. It was international news. It was on the nightly news. Dan Rather was covering it. It was like huge story.
Good old Dan Rather.
Yeah. So he tries to escape. Ultimately, the Schoenfeld brothers turn themselves in separately. I believe it's James who turns himself in first, who I might be confusing the 2 brothers, but one of the brothers was the least involved, and he's the first one who turned himself in, kind of tried to save himself.
Right.
Saying like, yeah, I knew about it. Yeah, I participated, but like, it wasn't my plan. I didn't do this. I didn't do that.
Right.
And then the other brother ultimately turns himself in, and then Fred tries to obtain an attorney who is like, dude, just turn yourself in. Like, what the hell? Right. So he makes this plan to turn himself in, and then the cops just roll up wherever he is and like grab him from his super rich house. They say they're like, they walk in and like, this is like the richest house the police have ever seen. And they're like, how could it be this guy? So what turns out happens was, this comes out during the trial, is that Fred wrote a movie script. And his goal was to take this surplus money, produce this movie, make millions of dollars, and become famous on his own without his parents. But his movie script was really just a mashup of like several popular movies that were out at the time, including Dirty Harry, which, fun fact, in the movie Dirty Harry, which I believe came out like 3 years before this, there is a bus hijacking scene.
Oh, wow.
So it was like almost identical to what was happening in real life here. So that's our kidnappers. And essentially, they eventually get sentenced to life without parole, but they appeal, and the life sentence was reversed. Richard Schoenfeld, I believe, like I said, I keep confusing the brothers, was released in 2012, and Fred Woods was released in 2022. So they are out of prison at this point.
Wow.
So fun facts about James Woods. When he was in prison, he was running several illegal businesses on the outside.
Of course he was.
Yeah, this dude was like a mob boss. Like, he was running a construction business. He was still doing the auto repair and like flipping cars. He ran like 3 different businesses in addition to the $10 million trust his parents set up for him. This man did not need money. No, he did not need money.
He needed nothing.
No. And then what they found out later on, which I don't know how they found this out later on, and they don't exactly say when they find this out, but he had kept and hidden the vans for monetary value, thinking this case was so famous he could eventually sell them at auction and make money off of those vans. So this dude was a class A asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what comes of all this? So we think about this whole thing. And one of the big things that came up in the trial that they only really touch on a little bit, well, they don't touch on, but they don't go super in depth in the Chowchilla documentary, is that there was this whole debate about sentencing because the defense lawyers maintained that no bodily harm was done to the children. And so a lot of psychologists and therapists and people like that were weighing in and saying that emotional trauma, emotional harm is physical harm.
Right.
But we have to keep this in context. At this point, this trial is now happening in the early 80s, where we still had a lot of that separation of mind and body connection, not this understanding of trauma and how it can impact you physically, psychologically, neurologically, all of those things. And so eventually that was why their sentence was reduced and they didn't get this time, because the judge determined that psychological harm is not physical harm.
I wonder if, you know how sometimes when the criminal trial doesn't turn out how they want, then there's usually
a civil trial. Yeah.
A civil trial, like OJ, who got the civil trial he lost. And that's a whole nother. But that to me would be like lifelong, right? Like issues from this. And he's got money.
Yeah, exactly. But they actually never end up going after it. At one point, when there was a parole hearing for Woods, there were allegations that he was bribing families and bribing the children not to testify or not to make statements about his parole release. And then he says, oh, yeah, well, I told him, not to make a statement and to let me get paroled, but I didn't offer them any money. I would never give them any money.
It sounds like he was trying to play off as like dumb rich kid, but he's actually like pathological. Like if there's something there.
He's like pure like psychopath material. And I don't throw that word around as casually as a lot of people do, having come from the forensic realm. I do know the differences in it and how it's different from being a sociopath, but he's true psychopath material where he really only focuses and cares about himself. He refuses to take any responsibility for the harm that's done, and is really manipulative of everyone in his life. He's manipulative of the Schoenfelds. He's manipulative of his parents. He's manipulative of the legal system. So he's really just kind of playing everything to his advantage and doesn't really care one way or the other.
Wow. Jeez.
So during all of this, there is a doctor named Lenore Terr, and I believe she was in New York, and she was studying child and adolescent psychiatry, and she was kind of ending her doctoral program and wanted to go into research. And so she heard about this case, and by this point, it was past the trial. So part of the trial was these children were forced to face their kidnappers, which now I think we would be a little bit more protective of children in that courtroom setting about that.
Yeah.
Children, if they're involved in these difficult court cases, they tend to be interviewed maybe off-site, but on camera. So the accuser can watch the video, but they're not face-to-face seeing the person.
Them. Yeah, of course.
So that was part of some of this stuff. But Lenore Terr is like, we've never seen trauma of this magnitude in these children. Like, let's study this. Let's learn something from this. Let's figure out how we can help these kids, but also learn what to do for the next generation of children who are traumatized. And so at this point in time, there was a lot of chatter going on around what was going to happen with these kids. And this part is like heartbreaking. The principal of the school said that the children were fine. They had no issues.
Okay.
And then, so there was no support offered from the school. Not that it was the school's fault, but still, like, they should be supporting these children. And think about this. This is 26 children in your school that I would assume probably doesn't have more than 150 children. So it's like, that's like that's like a big chunk of your population.
Those kids, but their friends, their
siblings, family members. Yeah.
Everybody who was affected by this. I'm sure the whole town, the whole community was just.
Yeah. Wow. And it's funny that you say that because they don't really talk that much about the larger impact on the community, on the town, on the siblings. They talk mostly about the kids who are now adults. So the principal's like, they're fine. They look great. They're doing great. No problems. And then I don't know who sponsored this, but they decided, hey, let's just send them all to Disneyland. So they loaded up all these kids and sent them to Disneyland. And Mike Marshall talks about, as an adult, or it's either Mike or Larry. I get the two of them confused because they have very similar like kind of ways of describing things, very poetic ways of describing things. And I'm pretty sure it's Larry. He says that going to Disneyland was an intrusion into his never-ending nightmare. And I'm like, and like they show a picture of him where like he literally looks like he's crying and like hugging like Goofy, but not like a happy cry.
I guess it was like on theme with like Make-A-Wish, like, oh, this kid is a traumatic health issue. We do this and it like,
They'll make them happy. They'll forget about it.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there were some therapists and doctors involved at this point because now I believe it's like 3 to 4 years post the kidnapping. There are therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. I don't know exactly who. They just said doctors, but I'm hoping these were mental health doctors. I'm hoping they're not. But they told parents not to reward the behavior of nightmares in their children. So if your children woke up and had a nightmare because of this, ignore it. So we know that's not the best response either.
No.
But again, we have to look at the context. They didn't know any better. They didn't know how else to handle this. And then I had talked about the debate about bodily harm versus mental harm. No one asked the children. This was more adults making decisions of, oh, the kids are fine. They're physically fine. Like no one actually sat down and said to the kids, like, do you feel like you were physically harmed in any of this? And I believe it's a doctor who was for the defense. He says, oh, well, like at the most there were a couple bruises and scratches, but that was from them trying to dig their way out, not from them being put in there. I'm just like what? A child had to dig themselves out.
Right. So yeah, night terrors, nightmares. I'm sure there's bedwetting. I'm sure there's behavioral issues. I'm sure there's learning issues.
Yeah. So some of the things that Lenore saw in these children. So someone had said that of these 26 children, maybe one or two would have signs of trauma. And she found in her research directly with the children and their families that 100% of the children were traumatized and deeply traumatized, not just like mild. And so she began to both treat these children, but then also study the long-term effects. So she followed them over time. It wasn't just like this one-time treatment and then she moved on. What I thought was interesting was no one talks about if they interviewed or did any research with the bus driver, who was an adult. So at the time of this, I would say he was probably in his 60s. So he was an older adult. So I wonder if there was any comparison of the trauma that he endured or carried with him versus the children.
I guess he could rationalize and understand things in a much different way, though, than a child could. I'm sure there's fear and trauma, but like his logical part of his brain could like push through in a different way than theirs could.
Right. One part I didn't talk too much about just because it was just so painful to watch, but they basically are hailing this bus driver as like a hero. They had Ed Ray Day and they had a parade for him. And they only interviewed him or talked to him about it, but no one spoke to the children.
Sorry, I jumped my late
had an earthquake.
Toward me. Sorry.
So no one interviewed the children. A lot of them didn't want to speak publicly about what happened. So for quite some time, no one really knew the integral role that Mike Marshall played in the escape.
Right.
And because he was a child, they're like, well, you don't need to talk to the kid, talk to the adult who was there about stuff. So he was hailed the hero. And then Mike was left with like this cognitive dissonance of like, well, am I a hero? Like, did I do anything? Like, well, do I want the attention? Shouldn't I just be happy we're all safe? Like, Ed's not a bad guy. Why am I mad at him? So he had a lot of struggles with that.
Yeah.
So what Lenore Terr found out was that there were a lot of symptoms that these children were having. And she has a lot of like really good sound bites in this documentary. And one of the things she says is that she wanted to know, like when she heard about this case and didn't meet the kids yet, she wanted to know what happens when you're frightened to death, but you don't actually die. And I was like, that's essentially what happened to these kids. Like they really thought they were going to die.
Yeah.
And she conceptualizes trauma as everyone has their own natural defenses against the bad things in life. But when your defenses don't meet the severity of the situation, that equals trauma. And I feel like that's a really interesting way to think about it because I think people think of trauma of it's a really bad thing. But we know that lots of people go through really bad things and actually don't develop PTSD or trauma. And so it's about your own defenses and what you can handle versus what is too much.
So your own defenses and like your own coping skills.
Exactly.
It kind of, if it surpasses that, that's trauma. If it's
exactly.
That
so like, for example, people who were in 9/11, two people could have been through 9/11 and one person maybe had stronger defenses, maybe due to other trauma or other situations. Someone maybe had no defenses because they've never been in a bad situation before. Those two people may not develop the same type of trauma or the same type of symptoms. One may not be traumatized at all. And so, and when I say that, I mean trauma with a capital T, diagnostic trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. Everybody can have little t trauma. And so that
that makes me like, I think there's like a Sesame Street song, like big T, little T, what begins with T?
Trauma. Yay, trauma.
It's like a turtle in a something. I don't know. Sorry. I'm having my own flashbacks.
It's probably not about trauma, but it still fits. So some of the things that she noticed in the children's recounting of what actually happened was difficulty with a sense of time, understanding how much time had elapsed since they were kidnapped, what was going on, hallucinations triggered by fear. So more than one of the children, once they were buried underground, had hallucinations of seeing the kidnappers standing above them or seeing their parents at their home, things like that, which were very vivid. As we talked about before, sleep problems, nightmares, hypervigilance, fear, re-experiencing or reliving the trauma, sleepwalking. They didn't talk too much about bedwetting, but I'm sure that was something that can happen. People were saying that they were being triggered by vans or buses or stalled or blocked vehicles in the road, lowered self-esteem, significant personality changes. So I think it is Andrea, that's Larry's sister. He said that before, and his sister is not involved in the documentary. He says that before the trauma, she was very outgoing and talkative and kind of like life of the party, like always smiling. And afterwards, she didn't want to be touched. He wasn't allowed to hug her. She wouldn't want to talk to people. Her self-esteem was like really severely impacted by it. She didn't want to have emotional or physical intimacy with anyone. Another big thing that's kind of heartbreaking is these children essentially developed an acceptance of death as a reality. Like death is going to happen and it's probably going to happen soon. And so they didn't have thoughts about the future or plan for the future. Worry, panic attacks, tearfulness, nausea. There's a comment, I believe it's Jennifer. She says at one point she just wanted to be nobody because that's the other part of this. Everyone knew that she was one of the kids on the bus.
Right.
And that followed her whole life.
Right. I'm sure there is something that feels like nobody else understands what we went through, but everybody else like knows us. And
they think they know us.
Or they think they know us, but nobody else can understand this except for us who actually went through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a lot of these issues continued or worsened in adulthood. So both Mike and, as I said, Jody Harrington, who ends up passing, developed severe addiction issues. One of, I believe it's Larry, he says that he never married. He never, wanted to have close relationships, but he did kind of channel all of this fear and this trauma into his faith, and he became a pastor. And so he's very involved in his church. And there's a really sweet scene at the end of the Chowchilla film where Mike and Larry reunite for the first time since like the 1980s. Aww. And it's just so heartbreaking because Larry's like, you're my hero. You saved me. No one else. And Mike's like, no one ever told me that before. He's like, I always thought it, but like I never heard someone else say it. And
I want to cry. I want to go hug Mike.
Yeah. Mike, amazing guy. One thing I will say about Mike that they don't talk about for good reason, but one thing I find really fascinating is they have a lot of audio tapes of the interviews from when they were children. And so they play them throughout. Mike's voice never changed. He still sounds, as like a 68, 70-year-old, he still sounds like 14-year-old him, like before his voice changed, before his voice dropped.
Stuck.
Yeah.
Sort of in that.
Yeah. And that's what it seems like. Even the way that he describes things, it feels a little, I don't want to call it immature because that has a negative connotation, but he kind of just never was able to move. Parts of him were not able to move past, despite all the work he's done, because he did struggle with addiction and he's in recovery. He is getting a lot of his life back and is a happier person now, but there's just parts of him that may not be able to change.
Wow.
So Lenore Terr called these children the little pioneers of medicine because so much was learned from their experience and their participation in all this study and all this treatment over time that we now know how to do better for kids. So that is the story.
Wow.
So I know, I told you it was a very detailed, very long story. So what can we talk about psychology-wise? So treatment of trauma. One of the treatments that we use with kids, especially like little ones, I always call them littles. And I'm like, most people don't know what I'm talking about when I say the littles. Unless you remember that cartoon, but the littles.
Yes.
But different thing. So one thing that we do with a lot of younger children who are coping with any sort of trauma is a thing called sand tray play therapy. And essentially what that is you have exactly what it sounds like, a tray of sand. Usually it's like elevated off the floor, but you can, kind of set it up however you want. And you would have a bookcase, kind of like the one that's behind me, just covered in all different types of figurines, and any type of figurine you can think of: animals, people, cars, weapons, clothes, tools, all sorts of things. And then the children are essentially just allowed free reign to play out their trauma. And they actually do it without the sand tray play therapy that I've practiced in the past is very unstructured. So you basically just bring the kid in the room and let them do whatever. And then through observations of their play, especially repetitive play or repetitive themes, that helps you tap into the trauma and work through it.
Okay. So it's like an offshoot of an art therapy. It's the same vein of.
But it's a little more interactive because essentially the point of it is, and you've probably heard this phrase or something similar to it, is like a corrective reenactment or a corrective emotional experience where now the child is in control of the figures.
Got it.
Ostensibly playing themselves out, and they can play it out until either they've come to accept what has happened or they've come to a different conclusion of what has happened.
Okay.
And so in my personal experience, one of a really, heartfelt, emotional sand tray play therapy situations I saw was I was working with a little kid. I think he was like 6. I was working in a therapeutic nursery school. So the oldest he could have been was 6, but he was definitely one of the older kiddos. He had watched his father be arrested and violently beaten. And he had physically witnessed it. Like his dad was holding him. His dad put him down. The cops grabbed him, assaulted him. And so this kid was very traumatized by that. And so we would go and we'd have our therapy session in the playroom. And he would grab a bunch of toys. And at first it was just a whole bunch. And then he started grabbing the policeman figure and another guy and a couple other people and the police car and some bats and things like that. And he would play someone getting beaten up by the cops.
Wow.
And would play out a little child screaming and saying, "Daddy, are you okay?"
Oh.
And he played that over and over and over again. And then one day he played it and the police didn't beat him up. The police yelled at him and said, "Don't do that anymore," and then got in their car and left.
Aww.
And he did that with without any guidance from me.
He literally worked through it.
He literally worked through it. And it was because no one was telling him, don't say that, don't do that. It was just, he could do what he wanted, uninterrupted. He didn't have to do it for a certain amount of time. He could just do whatever he wanted. And he was eventually able to work through it. And I would say, I was only there for like 2 years, but I would say he probably worked on that for at least a year or so. But things like that can be really helpful for kids. So that type of play therapy, that's a very specific type of play therapy. There's other types of play therapy, but that one can be really helpful, especially with the much younger kids. And so sand tray play therapy was actually developed in the late 1950s by psychologist Dora Klaff. K-A-L-F-F. Klaff.
Got it. See, you're the French one.
It's not French.
No, I'm German. That sounds German, but I don't do German.
Would you say German, maybe Dutch?
Dutch. Yeah. I don't know. I don't do that either, but I can't help you with it.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right.
So anyway, she was the one who originated it. It's developed over time. And it is very useful. And there's a lot of therapists out there play with it. And like you play with it, use that therapy in their therapy with children and in play. As you said, art therapy can be similar, but it's more using drawing, painting, sculpting, doodling, other techniques, where sand tray therapy, it's more the child has to be less creative in the actual objects that they're using, but they're still playing out what's going on. So that's, sand tray therapy, there's not a whole lot more to say about it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It can be very cool. I loved it. I wish more places did it. There are some limitations with what insurance will cover as far as play therapy, but it's definitely something that's out there and can really show lasting positive effects for children. Yeah. And it can be, I think, something that we forget a lot as just adults in the world, but play itself is very restorative. So that's why, like, sometimes they'll say, like, adults need playtime too, because it's harking back to imagination and letting go of stresses and worries, and in turn, sometimes working through some shit. So therapy, playing can be really helpful. And play is how we learn about the world. Right. So that's another reason why, that works. So after all of her studies and everything, Lenore Terr wrote a book called Too Scared to Cry, Psychic Trauma in Childhood. It's an amazing book. I had to read it in grad school. I took a class entitled Trauma and Dissociation, and that was the first thing that we covered. So it was a really, really great book. It was originally published in 1990, but it's still published today, and it definitely is one of the cornerstones of reading when you're thinking about childhood trauma. And so let me see. I think that was most of the stuff. Let me see if I had anything else. Thoughts, questions, comments?
No, no criticisms. The whole thing is an interesting story, and I feel like that time period, 70s, 80s, is where psychology really got its teeth into, like, that's even when they started studying the serial killers and things like understanding all of this and then really now doing something with it. So it's interesting that that occurred right in that time period, and it really ushered the way into childhood trauma being understood. So
yeah, and I wonder sometimes too, like, have we had times in our lifetime where there was a systematic shift in the way professions or areas of study look at things? And I feel like COVID is probably a big one that we really haven't seen the after effect of, but I think it has shifted a lot about workplace trauma, a lot about health trauma, a lot about medical trauma, a lot about what quarantine and isolation do to children developing, do to adults, do to the elderly. Right. So I think it was an opportunity for us to learn, but I don't know if we're quite there yet with what to do with it. Right. And a lot of the stuff, like things I think we take for granted now, like in the 70s and the 80s, nobody locked their doors. So it was like things like this. I think, unfortunately, the 70s and the 80s were a time both sociologically and politically where there were a lot of shifts, and we just saw a lot of tragedies happen. And so it kind of shaped our way of being safe in the world. Yeah. And maybe not for the better, but I think it's kept a lot more people alive. A serial killer just can't walk through your front door anymore, hopefully, if you're locking your doors. But I think, there's been a lot of social changes over time that have stemmed from tragedy, and this is just one of them.
Yeah. No, it was a formative time, and it's at least those survivors can know that their story helped future children, future generations. Yeah. Hopefully, at least the ones who were interviewed probably know that, but hopefully the rest of them as well.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, like I said, you only talk to some siblings, you don't talk to others, and you have to respect their privacy too. They'd been through so much, they were literally on the news, had to be in court, where it's like, these people might not want to rehash it. They might want to deal with it on their own. So there's a lot that I don't think we will know. But hopefully we've learned on how to be kinder to people who have been through trauma and how to understand that everyone's experience is a little bit different.
Yeah. No, very interesting.
Yeah, so that's my story, and my cocktail is fully melted but still delicious.
It's like dessert. No matter what you do with it, it's probably pretty tasty.
It feels like too sunny and tropical and tasty for this terrible story. I didn't make the drink. Somebody else did.
All right.
And then just one last plug. There's some really great resources if you'd like to learn more about childhood trauma and how to treat it if you're a professional in the field. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has amazing free trainings about trauma-informed care, which I've taken some of those trainings, but they also have great resources for families, children, things like that, if you know a child who has been traumatized.
Awesome. Definitely.
And that link will be in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So that concludes our episode. Thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Medical Media Mixer podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps others find the show. Want to keep the conversation going? Follow us on social media. We're at Medical Media Mixer Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and on Pinterest, the Medical Media Mixer board.
If you'd like to support the show and help us grow, check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/Medical Media Mixer Podcast. And on Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Medical Media Mixer Podcast. If you have a topic idea, feedback, or just want to say hi, send us an email at medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. You can also stream all of our episodes and find more info on our website, medicalmediamixer.podbean.com. We're available on all major podcast platforms, so no matter where you listen, we're there. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep mixing medicine and media.